Penn State versus Ohio State is perhaps the most important game in the Big Ten this year, and we finally get to see the matchup this weekend. We finally get to figure out who's better. Has Penn State finally gotten over the hump? Is Ohio State that team that we think they are, or are they maybe a little bit overrated? Penn State hasn't played anybody, so we don't know if they're any good either. But none of that matters. It's going to get settled this Saturday at noon. Now, with the intro out of the way, I'd like to say hello and welcome to the JSA studio. I'm your host, as always, Nathan, and today we are going to be breaking down Penn State versus Ohio State. We're going to start off by talking about some context. And what do I mean by context? I mean stuff that isn't on the field, stuff that will affect what happens on the field, but isn't film or about who's better than who. Contextual stuff, as to say. The biggest one of that is the injuries for Ohio State. Emeka Egbuka, Travion Henderson, Mayan Williams, several other players. A lot of Ohio State's best players are not healthy, and we don't know if they're going to be able to play or not. Chip Trayanum is also hurt, who's kind of taken over RB2 while Mayan Williams has been hurt. Ohio State does have a lot of question marks when it comes to who is healthy and who is actually going to play in this game. And I've listed some injuries so far, but none of them, I think, are as important as Denzel Burke on the defensive side of the ball. I think Denzel Burke is your best corner. I think he's a day 2 pick, probably early to mid second round, and has been maybe your best player on defense this year. He's really, really good, and losing him would be a big blow because Penn State does have the offensive line and the receiving talent to potentially exploit a new starter or a young player who would be filling in for him. I think that is the single most important injury in terms of if a player plays or not, that one is going to affect the game the most. When it comes to the schedule, if you take away West Virginia from Penn State, they have a bottom 5 schedule in all of college football, and in my opinion, a worse schedule so far through the year than Michigan. They've played absolutely nobody. Ohio State has played Notre Dame and Maryland, both of which are, I think, better than West Virginia anyway. And Penn State did blow out West Virginia, but in terms of what we've seen on the field through the schedules and stuff like that, that edge is going to go to Ohio State. I think we know more about Ohio State as a fact than we do Penn State. I think there are some things that I think I know about Penn State, but I know pretty much all that there is to know about Ohio State at this point in the season because of their schedule and the fact that they've played real football teams. However, in a response or a counter argument to that, Ohio State has straight up played bad at times. They've put out tape that looks absolutely abysmal. First half of Maryland, most of Indiana, the first half against Youngstown State, most of Notre Dame as well. The offense hasn't looked great for long stretches of time this year. And Penn State just doesn't have film like that. Now, they also haven't played anybody, like I've already talked about, but they don't have film where the offense just looks inept or horrible. I mean, the closest that you could say would be Northwestern, but they never really had the opportunity to show their second half sort of adjustments or in-game adjustments after that game started off 17-10, and then Penn State kind of pulled away. They didn't really have the opportunity to show their in-game adjustments because they just kept getting the ball in Northwestern territory, so they're just like, oh, this is free points. And while that is credit to the defense, we haven't really seen Penn State in a situation where they have struggled and then come out in the second half and turned it on, so to speak. And we've seen that from Ohio State, specifically against Maryland. Now that we have some contextual stuff out of the way, the last thing that I'm going to say before we jump into the positional breakdown, starting with the quarterbacks and start looking at some film, is the films that I am showing. I'm only pretty much going to show one play for each side. I might do 2 plays, but that's whatever. The film that I'm going to show you, the 1 or 2 plays that I'm going to show you in a specific segment, are not necessarily the whole story, but they are indicative of what the grander picture is. So if I'm showing you a play where a problem might happen, you can infer that since I'm showing it to you, it happens multiple times. And on the flip side of that, if I'm showing you a positive about something, then you can also assume that this is something that the offense or defense can do consistently. We're going to start off with this play from Kyle McCord in the first game of the season, because this is really the only inexcusable, just dramatically bad decision and throw that Kyle McCord has made while he's been the quarterback for Ohio State here. So I'm just going to let it play. I don't really have anything to draw on the screen. It's just going to be a play action and a little bootleg. I don't particularly like the call. And you could argue that that's pass interference right there, but he thinks he's going to try to block him. You know, when you run a one-man route, it's not necessarily a good idea, and he's going to go back against the grain to try to throw it to the tight end backside. Never a good idea. Never a good idea. But like I said, this is really the only truly awful play that Kyle McCord has had at the quarterback position. Outside of this, he's been really solid. I don't particularly understand why some people are talking about Kyle McCord like he's the problem, because I don't believe that he is. And the reason I don't believe Kyle McCord is the problem with this offense is because of plays like this, which you can see several times. This one is just the best, in my opinion. Now, it's actually not going to count because Marvin Harrison kind of is going to juggle this ball a little bit. But right here, you've got Marvin Harrison, and he's just going to run a little go route because there is no corner in college football that can cover him one-on-one. And pre-snap, Kyle McCord is going to recognize that this is likely going to be one-on-one coverage, or that this safety is not going to be able to get over there in order to help on this go route. So he knows where he's going. And he's going to snap the ball, look over the middle first, and then go to Marvin Harrison where he actually wants to throw the ball. Throw the ball perfectly in time, perfectly on rhythm. And the location of this is just absolutely absurd. And another thing I want to talk about here, this is open. Like Marvin Harrison Jr. is right here, and the Notre Dame defensive back is right next to him. But this is open in the NFL. This is NFL open, not college open. But Kyle McCord is going to deliver this pass perfectly. That is a beautiful throw. If number 20 here for Notre Dame could have gotten his hand up, he still would not have been able to get the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr., out of Marvin Harrison Jr.'s hands, that is. So this is beautiful ball placement by Kyle McCord. It is one of the most difficult throws to make in all of football, going down the field to hit this and to throw it perfectly, not just good, but perfectly, is very, very impressive. Now, Drew Allar has also been relatively impressive this year. Now, he's played Delaware and UMass, but he's been very impressive to me so far this year. This play right here is going to show both the good and the bad from Drew Allar. Now, he doesn't have an interception on the season yet, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he isn't putting the ball into harm's way. So this right here, it's just a real simple shot play. It's going to be max protection, and you're just going to see a pair of deep crossing routes here. And what happens is West Virginia is that good of a defense where they're going to send Keandre Lambert-Smith here in motion down over here, and then he's going to take off and go across the field. But West Virginia is the kind of defense where if you're only going to run a two-man route, you're probably not going to be able to get anybody open. So Allar is going to recognize that, get a little bit of pressure late in the play. So you come up through here, and now right here, this is when you'd like to be throwing this ball either to this receiver who's cutting across the field here, but number 7 is in zone coverage for West Virginia. So if you throw that here, he's going to pick it off. And this player, and well as another player right up here, I think, are going to take away that route as well. So he doesn't know what to do. Sees a little bit of pressure late. I mean, he had like 4.5 seconds to throw the ball, but he's going to make him miss, run up the field, realize scramble drill because he keeps his eyes down the field, which is something young quarterbacks do struggle with, which Alar has not so far this year. And then is going to recognize that Keandre Lambert-Smith is breaking open with no sort of good technique at all, just pure arm. He's going to flick it 40 yards downfield and into Keandre Lambert-Smith's hands. Now, number 2 for West Virginia here, if he was a better player, like he's okay, don't get me wrong. West Virginia is a solid football team. They're well coached defensively. But if he was a better play, this is intercepted. If he was a better player, this is an interception because the ball placement is not very good. The ball placement probably should have been somewhere more in this area right here. Now, it was impressive the fact that he could even get the ball down the field because that's the type of talent he is. He has one of the best arms in college football. I think he has a top 10 arm in all of college football. It's very good. He's a good enough athlete. You're not going to draw up run plays for him, but he can move around the pocket well enough, potentially scramble and pick up 7 to 10 yards if there's nobody anywhere near him. But this sort of play is ill-advised unless you have the talent where it doesn't matter. And Alar does have the talent where it doesn't matter, but I'm not sure he has the execution to go along with that talent in order to continuously make plays like this or to consistently make plays like this. Now, where he does have the execution is on plays like this, where there's going to be quite a bit going on here. This tight end number 44 here is going to act like he's going to block and then release on a crossing route down the field. Keandre Lambert-Smith is just going to come off and also do another crossing route. The tight end is going to go in motion and then directly out into the flat. And number 16 here is going to be running a deeper crossing route. And Singletary, the back, is going to stay in and block. So there's a pretty simple read, but I forgot to mute it. But he's going to make the correct read quickly, and he's going to have perfect ball placement on this. He's going to layer the ball very well. He does have some pressure coming to him. He knows 45 is there. He's going to stand right still and deliver a perfectly thrown ball right here to this wide receiver. It's up high, right at his head, and it's away from the Iowa defensive back. This is the kind of stuff that you see more out of Drew Alar. And the making plays and doing stuff like that is where it gets a little bit dicey. But if he has time in the pocket and he makes his correct reads, he's really, really good. I've been thoroughly impressed with Drew Alar this year. I was fairly high on him coming into this season, and I do believe he has surpassed my expectations. Kyle McCord, on the other hand, I think has met. I kind of expected him to be what he is, which is sort of the inverse of Drew Alar. Whereas Penn State and Drew Alar doesn't really take the deep shot, they kind of just methodically move the ball down the field. Ohio State loves the deep shot. They're like, we have Marvin Harrison Jr., potentially the best player in all of college football, and we're going to get him running deep, and he's just flat out better than everybody else. So we're going to draw up deep shots for him. And he's been good at hitting those deep shots. He hasn't been perfect, but he's been good at hitting those deep shots. And in the intermediate and short game, he's also been good, but not great or perfect. And I think the intermediate game is where Ohio State's offense is missing a little bit, and I think that's because the offensive line doesn't really have it in them to block for 3 or 4 seconds without a little bit of extra help. They've been able to hold their own so far this season, but that's really been because of the play calling and just general design of the offense this year. when they have hit the deep shots, it's mainly been on max protect, sort of 2 or 3 man routes where you've got a tight end and a running back staying in to block and help the offensive line. There aren't a whole lot of examples where you've got 3 or 4 or 5 man route concepts and Kyle McCord has had time to really read the whole field and look at it, which is why I decided to show you one example of one with the Marvin Harrison deep shot play, this second play out of Kyle McCord that I showed you. That one had 4 people running routes, and he still had the time necessary to throw the football. So if you give Kyle McCord time, I think he could be a very, very, very good quarterback at the Power 5 level. However, Drew Allar has been more consistent in that intermediate range. In fact, that's really been where he's excelled. The deep shots have come and gone, but they don't really have that in their offense, or at least they haven't shown it so far through this season, and they haven't particularly needed to either. They've been able to move the ball pretty consistently, even against a elite caliber defense, in my opinion, in Iowa. So because of the way the offenses are ran, I am going to give a little bit of an edge in quarterback play to Drew Allar. I do think he has more physical talent than Kyle McCord, but because of the offenses, it seems like Penn State has more trust in their offense, either via the quarterback has the trust issues or the offensive line is the trust issues for Ohio State. Come to your own conclusions. I think it's the offensive line. But Ryan Day does not trust that offense like he has with previous offenses. And Penn State's offense seems to play with a lot of trust. They're running more complicated stuff than they have in previous years. And that's because I think they have a legitimate first-round caliber quarterback in Drew Allar. And Kyle McCord has that kind of upside as well. I don't think we're going to see it this year. I think it'll maybe come out next year. But right now, in this game, I am going to give the edge in terms of quarterback play to Penn State. Now we're going to pivot away from the quarterbacks and start talking about the offensive line in terms of the run game, because we did address pass protection quite a bit in the previous segment. Now we're going to talk about run blocking and the running backs themselves. But before we even do that, I think we can all safely admit we kind of know where this is going. Ohio State has a really solid group of running backs, probably the best depth of any running back room in the country. I think they have probably 4 running backs that could be running back 1 on like a mid-level Power 5 team. And Penn State just doesn't have that kind of depth. But the disparity between these two teams' offensive lines is so great that even though I would give Ohio State the advantage at running back, it doesn't particularly matter. The offensive line for Ohio State, in run blocking especially, is pretty solid. I think they're above average. Penn State's offensive line is borderline elite, and their offensive line is obviously headlined by, in a weaker quarterback class, a potential number 1 overall caliber offensive tackle in Olu Fashanu. Penn State has also been the better running team so far this year in terms of consistency and efficiency, but also in terms of just overall numbers. And Travion Henderson has been able to transcend the offensive line a little bit because he's the kind of guy that can make people miss, and he's super fast, so he can outrun a player who maybe wasn't blocked perfectly or even blocked well and get to the edge and get 5 or 6 yards when he really shouldn't have. But if he can't go, then I shudder to kind of think about what this run game might look like. And if Penn State can make you one-dimensional on offense, it's game over. So I'm going to show you some film from Ohio State first that sort of illustrates why their run game has been a little bit inconsistent, but also why the overall numbers still look good. And that's because of explosive plays. Ohio State, kind of like with the passing game, has had most of their yardage come from explosive plays. And that's not a bad thing. Explosive plays are awesome. I love explosive plays. So we're going to break down one of those type of explosive plays. This is one of those explosive plays that I have been talking about here. You're going to get a little bit of a fake read here by these two players. They're both going to pull, and the idea is to convince the linebackers that they need to go to where they're pulling, and then you take the running back who's super fast and get him out into the open field so that he can score a touchdown. And it's going to work exactly as intended. They're going to put this player right here in a bind. He is not athletic enough to come down here and make a tackle on Travion Henderson, and the rest of the blocks are going to do what they need to do. He, the tight end, number 88, is going to come out here and block him. Wide receivers are going to do their job blocking down the field. Snap the ball. You see that false read. Both these guys go. There's the tight end going to block the outside linebacker. You see both linebackers fell for the false read. They're both right here. They have no chance to make this play. Travion Henderson ends up having to go backwards just a little bit in order to get around him, but he's so fast it doesn't particularly matter. So when I was talking about earlier, when I said Travion Henderson has kind of been able to create where the offensive line has sort of lacked a little bit, or the running game has lacked a little bit schematically, if 23 is a better player, this is a 5-yard game. If that defensive end is a better player, it's a tackle for a loss. If the linebackers are better players, they could potentially get over here, recognize the false read, realize what's going to happen. But none of that happens on this play, and Travion Henderson is going to take it to the house because he's super fast. And it's an explosive play. It's a good play. And I like the concept of the false read, especially if you know that the defense is not going to be capable of recognizing that. But against a speedy defense like Penn State, this might not go the way that it's intended. Penn State, on the other hand, even if they aren't blocking perfectly on a play, they still typically do good enough for the running backs to be able to make a play happen. And you're going to see first play out of the second half, or one of the first plays out of the second half, rather. You're going to see just a little zone blocking here. And what you're going to see is this guy right here. He's going to take his player up the field, and then he's going to block and get around this defensive tackle here. And that's going to open up a little hole, and the running back is going to be good enough to read that hole. And some stuff happens later on this play, but doesn't really matter. That's not the point of this. You see, there's the running lane right here. There's the running lane. You can go this way if he wanted to, probably get tackled by Cooper DeJean here, but he's actually going to read it and cut outside because Singleton is a really, really good running back too. And even when they don't block perfectly, like 77 lost his rep right there towards the end. Even when they don't block perfectly, if that guy makes the tackle, it's still a 3-4 yard gain. And they're set up with 3rd and 1. Now, he's going to slip that tackle because he's really good and run downfield for another 10, 15 yards. But that doesn't matter so much, as the offensive line still didn't block perfectly, but the running backs were still able to make plays happen because the running backs are also really good, like Ohio State's. But the offensive line, I have seen them dominate and take over games. I haven't seen that from Ohio State, which is a major reason why I'm giving the edge to Penn State in this group. Now, just as easily as it was to give Penn State the edge at the offensive line and running back positions, it's way easier to give Ohio State the edge in the wide receiver and tight ends portion of this video, or as I will sometimes refer to them as the skill positions. Even without Emeka Egbuka, Marvin Harrison Jr. is good enough to just flat out beat the entire Penn State tight end and wide receiver room. Never mind the fact that Julian Fleming is also pretty solid, and Cade Stover is the best tight end in the Big Ten. And they also have a plethora of young wide receivers who are waiting for an opportunity to break out. All of those factors combined, this is easily in Ohio State's favor. However, I really like Penn State's group of players. I really like Keandre Lambert-Smith. I think he's a day 2 pick in this upcoming draft class. I think Theo Johnson at tight end is an underrated talent. He's somebody who, if he gets invited to the scouting combine, I think would put up borderline elite numbers. So Penn State does have some serious talent, even NFL talent, in their receiving core and their tight end room. But this just isn't comparable to Ohio State. Ohio State's just on a different level than Penn State in the receiving core. Like, I think Penn State has a good to potentially even great set of skill position players, and Ohio State has the best skill position players in the country. Like, if we're taking the whole group and we're counting tight ends, they have the best position group in the whole country. And to help illustrate that, I'm going to show you a play where Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to get the easiest 7 yards of separation in the history of college football. This play has become a staple for Ohio State in their offense this year, or at least variations of it. So we're going to be in 12 personnel here. We got 2 tight ends, and what you're going to see here is this tight end is going to release vertically down the field and then cut across the middle. He's going to come over here and run a little corner route. Emeka Ibuka at the bottom of your screen is going to run a drag route, and you're going to have the running back, no play action on this play, just do a little reverse and come over here. But the actual important route on this play, what this is designed to do, is to get Marvin Harrison open on a deep post route. The idea is to get the free safety looking at all these stuff over here in the middle and then throw it behind it to Marvin Harrison. And that is exactly what is going to happen on this play. The offensive line is going to hold up, as you can see here. No blitz or anything. It's 1st and 10. They're probably just trying to feel it out. And Kyle McCord is going to take a little bit too long to hit this route. He stays on this a little bit too much. He sort of perhaps recognized zone a little bit sooner and moved off to something else, but he didn't. He's going to be a tad bit late on this throw, but look at how deep Marvin Harrison is. Marvin Harrison has goddamn 7 yards of separation here. Like, he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then like a little bit more this way. That's like almost 7 yards of separation somewhere right along there. And Kyle McCord, one of the limitations with him is that he doesn't have an elite arm. He has a very good arm, but he doesn't have like elite arm. So he's going to underthrow this ball a little bit, but that has more to do with timing than it does with arm strength or anything like that. So Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to make one guy miss, and then that free safety that blew the coverage is going to come and tackle him. But it's still a massively big play, and Marvin Harrison Jr. is just way too good for these guys to be doing what they're doing and the coverage that Maryland was playing on this play. Moving on to the next position group, which is going to be the front sevens for both of these teams. And there's an interesting dichotomy here, because depending upon how you look at each of these front sevens for Ohio State and Penn State, you can come to a clear winner for either. If you're looking at it through pure NFL talent and upside and how good the players are individually, Ohio State's defensive line is better than Penn State's defensive line. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of production this year and pure domination, then it's Penn State this year. But Penn State also hasn't played the level of competition that Ohio State has. So, of course, they're going to dominate Delaware and UMass. However, on the flip side of that, they've dominated everybody, including West Virginia and Northwestern, both of which I think have competent offensive lines. So are we going to give the edge to Ohio State because they have more talent and higher ceilings and hypothetically would play better against high-level talent than Penn State? Or are we going to go with Penn State and the proven production from this past year? And that's a nuanced question, but generally speaking, I do tend to lean towards talent. And it's not like Ohio State's defensive line hasn't played well either. They haven't really rushed the passer consistently, but they've been dominant in run defense far more than Penn State's. So even then, it's kind of split 50-50 because Ohio State's defensive line is better against the run, in my opinion, and Penn State's defensive line is better against the pass, in my opinion. So we're really splitting hairs here, but because of the difference in talent and depth on the interior for Ohio State, I am going to give the edge to Ohio State in this scenario, because Ohio State still has generated a fair bit of pressure, and they've mainly done that through stunts along the defensive line. So I'm going to show you a clip of that happening, and then we're going to move on to talk about Penn State. This play right here is pretty indicative of what the Ohio State front seven does really, really well. You're going to have your outside linebacker, Sawyer, right here, and you're also going to have both your middle linebackers walked up into the A and B gap here, respectively, and but you're really going to see just a four-man rush here. They're going to show a little bit of a blitz at the snap to try and confuse the offensive line. And then they're going to back off. You see these two linebackers right here and right here. They're backing off and dropping into coverage. So now you've got your best defensive lineman going up against a tight end and then potentially a running back after that, because they kept everybody in order to blitz. So they've only really got 3 people running a route on this play. And then you also see Michael Hall on this little twist here. I'm going to back this up a little bit. You're going to see Michael Hall on this little twist stunt with the other defensive tackle here. He's just going to obliterate this offensive lineman and get into the quarterback. I will say this stunt is not designed for him to get the pressure. It's designed for him to get the pressure, because the idea is that you get the guard to follow him, and then he wraps around and gets a clean shot to the quarterback. But that's not what happened, because Michael Hall is very good. I forgot to clear off the lines there. He's going to obliterate the center and then get in to force the quarterback to throw the ball before he really wants to. It is 3rd and 10. I don't think you can see it on the bottom of the screen, but it is 3rd and 10 in this play, and they get the pressure. And this is what the Ohio State defensive line and front seven does really well. They start off with a little disguise to confuse the quarterback and the offensive line and say, oh, we're going to blitz 2 extra people, so you need to keep the tight end and the running back in case somebody breaks free. And but then we're only actually going to rush 4, but because our stunts are so on point, we're going to get home anyway, even though you're keeping 2 extra people in to block. The Ohio State defensive line and linebacking core are elite units. And this is what the Penn State defensive line does really, really well. What you're going to see here is that they've got Chop Robinson lined up on the inside, and they're going to blitz this linebacker right here to try and create some one-on-one opportunities. And the guy between Chop Robinson and the guy in the end right here, number 20, he's actually going to do a little wraparound stunt with Chop Robinson here on this play and get in there to deliver some pressure, that is. Chop Robinson is going to get the double team, and the center does not come off of the double team quick enough in order to get number 20, who's going to wrap around. But then even then, if he doesn't get home, if that center comes off of it, Chop Robinson's still pushing that guard into the quarterback. This blitzing linebacker is pushing the left tackle into the quarterback. So when they're one-on-one, Penn State's defensive line wins consistently, even against well-coached offensive lines like Penn State. And the ball comes out too soon. It's inaccurate, and Penn State wins the rep, and they get off the field on 3rd down and long. This is what the Penn State defensive line does, especially in obvious passing situations. They're going to bring pressure to get the one-on-one opportunities, and then they're going to win the one-on-one opportunities. So even though Penn State is really, really good at rushing the passer, and Ohio State is not as good as rushing the passer compared to Penn State is not as good in the run game compared to Ohio State. So even though it's really kind of close, to be honest with you, I am going to stick with my original statement and say Ohio State's front seven is better than Penn State's front seven, because there's a greater difference between Penn State and Ohio State in the run game than there is between Penn State and Ohio State in the pass game. So Ohio State gets a slight edge in the defensive line group. Now, the secondary for these two teams, I think, is a lot closer than people want to admit. Kalen King is obviously the best player out of each of these two groups. I would say Denzel Burke is number 2, and I think that conversation is maybe a little bit closer than people want to admit about it. It wouldn't shock me if Denzel Burke went in the back half of the first round. I think there are going to be several teams that are really going to like what he does. And Kalen King, I think, is perhaps just a tad bit overrated. I don't think he's a top 10 pick. I think he's probably going to go somewhere between 10 and 20. So Denzel Burke and Kalen King is a little bit of a closer conversation than people want to admit. Ohio State safety play versus Penn State safety play, there's a little bit of a gap there in favor of Penn State. But Ohio State's safeties are vastly improved from last year. And when you're talking about CB2 and in the slot, I do think I would give slight edges to Penn State in those as well. But Johnny Dixon is really good. I still think Igmignosin has a lot of upside. I think Josh Proctor has also been really good for Ohio State. Ransom has been better, and you've got some rotation pieces as well that I think are pretty okay. But when it comes down to it, this conversation really does revolve around Denzel Burke and Kalen King. So I'm going to show you one play by each of those corners here, starting off with Denzel Burke. Now, this is the kind of stuff that you see out of Denzel Burke consistently. He's right here at the bottom of the screen. You can't actually really see him, but basically he's going to get a go route, and he's going to be in such perfect position that the ball has no business being thrown, quite honestly with you. But the Youngstown State quarterback isn't very good, so he's going to throw it anyway. So we're going to see it here. He's just going to send this little short motion here. Snap the ball. He's going to take his little 3-step drop, plant his feet. He's staring the ball down where he's going to go anyway. So chucking it deep. And here we go. Look where Denzel Burke is. In perfect position. He's on the inside here, and the ball right up here. It's going to go shoop here. And Denzel Burke is going to be in position to make this play like he's the wide receiver, not whoever the Youngstown State kid is. And he's just in absolute perfect position. This ball had no business being thrown at all, but the Youngstown State quarterback isn't very good, and Denzel Burke is going to go up and make the play. This is like a contested catch. This is a really good catch by Denzel Burke, and you see him do that quite a bit. Not necessarily the ball skills. This is the only time that he's had an interception this year, but he hasn't particularly had the opportunity to have an interception either, because he's just in the hip pocket of all these receivers anyway. So he doesn't have the opportunity to make more plays because he's so good at covering people. It doesn't particularly matter if he gets looked at, because he's not going to get thrown to, because he's in such perfect position every time. And it's because of that, and because of how good he is in the secondary, that he is the biggest impact if you were to lose him to injury for this game. It just would change the entire dynamic of the defense, because the other corners on your roster right now are not at that level. They could be in the future, but they aren't right now. So if Penn State can start winning one-on-ones, that can open up their whole offense, and you don't want that to happen. So Denzel Burke is the most important player, in my opinion, of the several Ohio State players that are injured in this game, or potentially injured for this game. He is the most important to play. So this play right here is fairly similar to the Denzel Burke play, except for it's going to be Daquan Hardy up here at the top right here. He's just going to get a go route, and the quarterback for Illinois is already deciding, I'm getting one-on-one, I'm going to take a shot, I got nothing to lose, we're completely outmatched in this game. So he is going to take the shot here, and Daquan Hardy is just going to be in a perfect position. This is man coverage, and he's in his hip pocket, so he's going to turn back and look for the ball, sees it's in the air, finds it, jumps up, wins the jump, and takes the ball away for Penn State. They do this really, really well. They take the ball away, maybe right up there with Iowa in terms of the best in the country. I think they have like 6 interceptions so far this year and another 4 or 5 forced fumbles. So this is a elite defense when it comes to taking the ball away. And it's not just their secondary that gets interceptions. Abdul Carter has one. I think another linebacker has one as well. I just can't remember their name off the top of my head. But that is going to be something that is very important for Ohio State, is to not allow Penn State to have the opportunity to create a turnover. So as we've kind of discussed so far in this video, these teams are simultaneously mirror images of each other and polar opposites. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that Kyle McCord has been much better at hitting the big play and navigating the pocket than Drew Allar, but Drew Allar has been better in the intermediate game and in the quick game as well. But defensively, they're almost exactly the same. They've got underrated secondaries and dominant front sevens that are simultaneously very similar and the exact opposites. OSU has a dominant run defense, and Penn State gets after the passer like almost nobody in the country. Ohio State doesn't necessarily create a whole lot of turnovers. Penn State does. So even though these teams are very similar, they're also the exact opposite of each other. So what we're going to do now is discuss how the matchups in the game are going to go. So instead of comparing quarterback to quarterback, we're going to compare quarterback to defense. You know, the part of the team that the quarterback actually plays. And for Ohio State QB versus the Penn State defense, I'm going to give a slight edge to the Penn State defense because of the pass rush and just because Kyle McCord has not shown the ability to consistently move the ball on offense yet. Now, when it comes to the OSU running backs and offensive line versus Penn State's front seven, this is a little bit closer. I'm going to give the slightest of edge to the Penn State front seven. I think ultimately the speed of the linebackers are going to make up for potentially some of the early mistakes that they make in the counter game or with misdirection stuff that Ohio State likes to do in the run game. I just think Penn State's linebackers are a little bit too athletic in order for that stuff to be as effective as it has been in other games this season. Now, the Ohio State skill positions, wide receivers and tight ends, versus the Penn State back seven, this is pretty easy. This is going to be Ohio State with the advantage here. And when we're talking about the Penn State quarterback versus the Ohio State defense as a total unit, I'm going to go ahead and give the edge to the Ohio State defense because Drew Allar hasn't played in an environment like what the shoe is going to be like this week. That context, which I didn't bring up until now because I didn't particularly feel the need to, is very much a factor in this sort of analysis that I'm giving here. I think the shoe is going to be rocking. I think he's going to make a mistake early on, and when that happens, he's going to need to bounce back. Now, whether he does or not is a different conversation, but I'm going to give the edge to the Ohio State defense as a whole, even though I have given Penn State the edge in both of the individual categories of running backs and offensive line versus front seven and skill versus back seven. Now, if I was 100% confident that Denzel Burke was going to play, I would give Ohio State the edge against Penn State's skill position group. But without Denzel Burke, I think Penn State's wide receivers and tight ends are as good as Ohio State's defensive backs. And the fact of the matter is that when you have equal talent in two opposing position groups, the offense wins because great offense beats great defense and elite offense beats elite defense and et cetera, et cetera. Good offense beats good defense. You can go all the way down. But since Denzel Burke may not play, he may play, he may not, I don't know. But since he has the potential of not playing, I am going to play it safe and say that he doesn't play, in which case I would give the Penn State skill an edge against the back seven. And I have Penn State with the advantage with the running backs and the offensive line versus Ohio State's front seven because of the lack of a consistent pass rush that Ohio State has had. They've been able to scheme up some pressure, but by the whole year, when they play a good offensive line, they haven't really gotten a whole lot of pressure, despite having a whole lot of talent and the ability to get pressure. So I'm going to give you two answers to who wins this matchup because I am extraordinarily conflicted. And this isn't like a thing with Michigan versus Georgia last week where they were so close I honestly couldn't make a decision. I think I have a decision that my brain has come to, and I have a decision that my gut has come to. And the one on the screen where it's Penn State 27, Ohio State 17, that's my brain. My brain says Ohio State can't run the ball consistently, and I don't think they're going to be able to do so against Penn State's defense, which means that they're going to have to sling it in order to win the ball game. But I don't think Ohio State has the tackle play to survive if they are forced to be one-dimensional by the Penn State defense. And offensively, I think Drew Allar is going to be able to give them enough in the passing game where Ohio State can't just load the box against this team and stop the run. So my rational brain has come to the conclusion that Penn State should win fairly comfortably because the two biggest mismatches in this game both favor Penn State. My gut, on the other hand, has come to the conclusion that James Franklin can't win big games, and that Penn State, for whatever reason, always has their quarterback turn into the worst version of themselves when they're playing Penn State, even though the rest of the team plays their goddamn tails off every year. And fun fact, the inverse of that happens whenever they play Michigan. The rest of the team sucks, but the quarterback is usually really good. So my gut has come to the conclusion that Ohio State should win fairly comfortably, with Ohio State scoring 28 and Penn State scoring 17. But don't worry, I'm not going to not take a stance. I am going to go with what my brain says. I am going to go with Penn State winning 27-17. And I do have more reasons to believe that Penn State is going to win this game than just the two biggest mismatches favor them. There's a reason that I didn't bring up the Northwestern game for Drew Allar. And that's because outside of that game, Drew Allar has been the same player every single time. In that Northwestern game, Drew Allar was missing horribly. He missed like 10 or 12 wide open targets and was just not accurate even on the passes that he completed. Outside of that game, he's been remarkably efficient and has looked like a really, really good player. So I'm not going to overreact to one game. You see, there are some people who get their head stuck so far up into these advanced statistics that their feet are off the ground. And what I mean by that is that sometimes people forget to actually watch the games and just make their conclusions based off of the numbers. I love numbers. I love advanced statistics. I love all those things. But none of those things trump the film. And if you were to look at the percentage of catchable passes, for example, that Drew Allar has thrown, it's not very good. But if you remove the Northwestern game, it's above average. So one game does not make a player worse than what he is, and one game does not make a player better than what he is. That's why you have to watch the film, and you have to watch more than one game. So with all of that out of the way, I am going to put my head on the chopping block and say Penn State beats Ohio State. But if you're an Ohio State fan and they end up winning this weekend, make sure you subscribe right now and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss my Monday upload where I break down everything that happened in the college football weekend, so that you can rub me being wrong in my face. I'll sit there and I'll take it like a man. I take my L's like a man. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm not scared of being wrong, because here's the dirty little secret that nobody else is going to tell you. Everybody is wrong all the time. But unfortunately, that is all that I have for you today. So once again, I'm going to ask you to like if you liked this video, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you disagreed with me at any point, or if you just have something to say, go ahead and drop a comment down in the comment section below. Let's just remember to be civil. After all, what do I know? I'm just some asshole on the internet giving you his opinion. I'll see you next time.